Sean Manaea pitched like an ace. The Mets bats came alive, and this team is now one win away from the NLCS, upsetting the Philadelphia Phillies. We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right state can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. Speaking of Booking.com, hopefully no one has to book anything in Philadelphia later this week because the New York Mets could now clinch this series with one victory on Wednesday night. That is how you come home after 16 days on the road, where the Mets went to, 4 cities? Or I guess they went to Milwaukee twice. Regardless, this is a team that was through it for a couple weeks. They finally get to come home in front of 40,000 plus fans, and it was exactly what you wanted. I talked about this game in our Locked On crossover with the host of Locked On Phillies, Connor Thomas, and my own show previewing Game 3 today, and pretty much how I laid things out of what had to happen for the Mets to win this game. That's the script the Mets followed. And the first part of it, and the biggest part of it, was Sean Manaea being the Mets ace. And that was an ace performance from Manaea today. To sort of get myself hyped for the game, I was watching back 2015 playoff game highlights. I saw the video of Matt Harvey being at the ballpark, and I was like, man, let's watch that World Series start back, which of course ended in a really frustrating way, but it was still an amazing start. I watched DeGrom. And there was that Game 5 against the Dodgers where it was DeGrom to Syndergaard to Familia. Great pitching is what wins you championships, or at least gets you to a World Series. And the Mets need their starting pitchers to step up because, as we'll talk about in the next segment, the bullpen is still a major issue for this team. And Sean Manaea did exactly what you needed. I talked about the importance of landing the first punch. And that Phillies team was ready to try to land that punch early in the first inning. They hit the ball hard, each guy, but Manaea had the 1-2-3 first. Mets don't score in the bottom half. Manaea gets through the second. Of course, the stage was set for Pete Alonso to come up and have his first at-bat home after everything that we saw throughout this run. Alonso struggling to then having that huge home run to end the wild card series, to hitting the home run in Philly. First pitch he sees, the first run of the game for the Mets, Pete Alonso once again going to the opposite field. He had 4 opposite field home runs all season. The playoffs, all 3 home runs going oppo, hits it out, upper tank hits off of that siding, above that first deck in right field, puts the Mets on the board. They get another run in the 4th inning where Jesse Winker pimps the heck out of a home run, even more of a towering shot. And that was really it early on in this game. It was just getting those early runs, keeping the crowd in, as we talked about. And then it just keeps on coming back to Sean Manaea. Got into some jams, pitched his way through it. In the 3rd inning, ran into some trouble as he hit Edmundo Sosa, gave up a base hit to Trey Turner. That was after striking out Johan Rojas and Kyle Schwarber. Brought up Bryce Harper with 2 on. Manaea got a comebacker, got out of it. 4th inning, we have to talk about, this was before Winker's home run. You had an unconventional 1-2-3 inning as the second out came on a ball where Alec Boehm hit one off of the wall in right center. Tyrone Taylor made an unbelievable play, fielding it perfectly with the bare hand, throwing it to second, getting the out. I tweeted this after that play. I think Tyrone Taylor, based on the run that he's had through the playoffs, he's going to be your opening day center fielder next year. Now, there's young guys coming up. There's Jet Williams. There's Drew Gilbert. You have a lot of potential center fielders along the way, even Luis Angel Acuna. But I think early going, before those guys break out, this guy is going to get those opportunities at the beginning of the season because he's been so good and so clutch. throughout this stretch run. So that was a big momentum-saving play. Bohm standing on second base, maybe it's a different inning. Instead, you get through the lineup really quickly. You keep Manaea in a really good rhythm. Then you have the fifth inning fifth inning was easy. It was the sixth inning where Harper got his next opportunity with 2 runners on. Manaea had walked Kyle Schwarber and Trey Turner. Needs to get a big out. There's no outs. Here comes Harper. 3 pitches, sets him down. Just nasty stuff from Manaea. First pitch changeup where Harper was geared up for one of those elevated fastballs, gets a swing and miss. Then a couple more swing and misses on some sweepers. That was one of the biggest at-bats of the game. And then one of the best plays of the game, just for the vibes alone from the way Manaea was able to roar coming off the mound. He gets Nick Castellanos to hit that low line drive to Jose Iglesias, who catches it. Easy flip to Lindor for the inning-ending double play. That inning, there was so many different moments where that game could have gone the other way. Obviously, if Harper comes through, if Castellanos hits that line drive somewhere else, but instead you have Manaea through 6. And in the bottom half of the inning, the Mets really got to Aaron Nola. They got him out of the game. Mark Vientos, leadoff single. Then you have walks from Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso, loads the bases. The Phillies go to the bullpen. Now, this was another moment, again, where the game could have gone in a different direction because with the bases juiced, Jose Iglesias hits a ground ball. Vientos thrown out at the plate. Then you have Jesse Winker hits a fly ball, not deep enough to score Nimmo. And again, no runs across. So 2 outs, still sitting with the bases loaded. Are the Mets going to score? And Starling Marte continues to come through in the clutch, gets a huge hit. Probably in some ways, you could almost call it the biggest hit of the game. Either that or Alonso's home run to get the scoring going. As much as Jesse Winker's towering shot was so big and such a memorable moment, to come up empty there with the bases loaded, nobody outs, that would have been a huge turn in the game. Instead, you cash in those 2 insurance runs. That gave you a little bit of breathing room that obviously the Mets needed once you eventually got to the bullpen, because this is where the game got a little bit crazy, right? So 7th inning, Manaea had the insurance runs, easy, facing the bottom part of the lineup, 1-2-3 inning, right? So everything's looking good. Bottom of the 7th, Mark Vientos gets a 2-out hit off of Jose Alvarado. Nimmo and Alonso walk to load the bases, and Jose Iglesias comes through with a base hit that scores 2. The throw ends up hitting off the mound, goes off of the sidewall. Alonso had it not hit off the brick. Maybe he's able to score. He's a dead duck at home that ends the inning. So the Mets are sitting with a 6-0 lead. You feel great. Sean Manaea has turned in 7 brilliant innings. As amazing as this game was, and we will talk about what a huge victory this was in the final segment today as it relates to how the final 2 games will get played, how they'll get managed. I got to say, though, the end of this game was not as fun as the beginning, right? Felt like the first 6 innings of the game flew by, and then the last 3 were a grind. And I think there was some mismanagement here, not to knock Carlos Mendoza too much. He's been an amazing manager, but there's just some decisions that I would have done differently and some things that I think didn't necessarily go the Mets' way, where this game was closer than it should have been. There should have been 0 doubt at all that the Mets were going to win this game. And ultimately, I was confident the whole way through because the lead was never really at risk. I don't think the tying run ever came up to the plate, but there was a world where this game could have flowed a lot easier down the stretch, where maybe you don't have to use Ryan Stanek for 4 outs. So I want to talk about where things might have gone a little bit wrong down the end of that game. So we'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. Explore the U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Who knows? Maybe you want to explore San Diego, Los Angeles. I mean, you never know where the Mets might be coming up here next week. So, make sure you have the Booking.com app downloaded just in case, because with hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more that's available on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. The right stay is waiting for you at Booking.com. Booking.yeah. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching our live stream right now, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We hit our goal of 10,000 subscribers on the season, but now we're just looking to add on, maybe get to 11,000 by the end of this postseason run. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, I want to talk about the end of this game, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, but I just felt like this game in a couple different ways was mismanaged. So let's first talk about the pitching side of it. Open up the eighth inning with Sean Manaea when you have a 6-0 lead. Now, we have seen the Mets do this a couple times, and this game sort of followed a similar script as far as what Manaea was able to accomplish as the last time he faced the Phillies, although when he did, he gave up a couple solo home runs that weren't there. He was better today than that starting September 21st, but in that outing, he gave up 2 solo home runs, and other than that, retired 21 of the 23 batters he faced through the first 7. The Mets send him back out there for the 8th inning. He gives up a leadoff single, and then it turns into a bullpen adventure. The Mets win the game. It didn't matter, but it was maybe a little bit harder for that bullpen coming in without the clean inning. And if you're going to send Manaea out there, why just one batter? That's my first part of it. If you want to send Manaea out there to face the bottom of that lineup, I can get that. He really did carve him up throughout the game. I would have kept him out there, honestly. I think I would have kept him out there probably through just the bottom of the lineup and then have somebody ready to go to face Schwarber. And this is where I get to my campaign here that I talked about on yesterday's show, where I feel like Danny Young is not being used here as your only lefty. And that might be an issue for this team, that they don't have a lefty reliever that they trust. Now, I get not having faith in Danny Young, but if he's going to be on the roster, you can't pitch him in a 6-0 game. I felt like this would have been a good opportunity to see what you have here. Schwarber was due up third. You could throw Danny Young out there. He's going to face a couple of right-handed batters that aren't the best. And then you got the Schwarber matchup. And I talked about this on the show today. You know, if the Mets are to advance, whoever they face in the next round, there's going to be some lefties that you're going to have to go up against, whether that's Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, Max Muncy for the Dodgers. You know, for the Padres, I'm trying to think of who their big lefties are. Jackson Merrill comes to mind. They got a lot more stud righties on that team. Then maybe you eventually make this a World Series run, and let's say you're facing the Yankees and it's Juan Soto, or the Tigers who have Kerry Carpenter, or the Royals who have Vinny Pasquantino, whoever it is. Like, you need a lefty in the bullpen that can get those big guys out. And I will say, while Danny Young has had an up and down year, we talked about the numbers on the show today. Against Bryce Harper, he was 1 for 4, 3 strikeouts. So Danny Young did handle that matchup during the regular season. And this was the ideal game to see what you have, to see if Adam Ottavino can get outs even. If they went to Ottavino to start off that 8th with Stanek waiting, I would have been good with that as well. You have some dead spots on this roster, and you're really going, and this is what happens. Bullpen shorten up in October. I get it, but instead you start off with Manaea. He gives up a hit. You go right to Maton. Maton strikes out Brandon Marsh, walks Kyle Schwarber, gets Trey Turner to ground out, then gives up a base hit to Bryce Harper to score a run. Like, that would have been the perfect matchup for Danny Young to go up against Harper, see what that looks like. But if you're going to drop him in for just that matchup, well, now he's facing Nick Castellanos and Alec Boehm. So I get not going to him to face Harper because of the 3-batter minimum, but that's why I would have started the inning with Danny Young. Let's see what he can do against the 8th hitter, the 9th hitter, and Kyle Schwarber. If that goes well, you're winning 6-0. All of a sudden, maybe Danny Young steals you 2 more. Like, who knows? Maybe Danny Young gets the final 6 outs of the game. You really don't know how it plays out. The fact is, Carlos Mendoza trusts right now, it's pretty clear, Edwin Diaz, Ryan Stanek, Phil Maton, and Reed Garrett. And that's it in his bullpen. So that means you almost have to keep a David Peterson in the pen potentially for the playoffs, so you have another arm you can trust out of it. And just hopefully use him in the right spots where you get a little bit of length out of him as well. It's going to be interesting to see if this run continues, how the Mets get around this bullpen, because it's still a big issue. Again, this game should not have been that close. And then another thing I didn't love in this game was the decision to pinch run for Mark Vientos in the 7th inning. Now, I got it. 2 outs, he gets a base hit. You want to be able to score that run from first if Brandon Nimmo is able to double. Or actually, at that point, it would have been, it would have been Nimmo who came up first. Nimmo and Alonso both walk. They go to Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader is now in this pinch runner defensive replacement role, right? He would have been thrown out trying to steal both times if the Phillies middle infielders just caught the balls and placed a clean tag. Bryson Stott, and I can't remember which game that was, game 1 or game 2, he tagged him and juggled the ball, and so Bader was safe. Tonight, Bader would have been out by a foot, but Trey Turner couldn't handle the throw. So that's one side of it. I feel like Acuna is better suited for that pinch runner role than Harrison Bader. Bader has run into a lot of outs on the bases this year, but that's sort of how they're trying to use them. Now, by pinch running in that spot, ultimately it doesn't matter, which you don't know. That's operating with hindsight. But you essentially took the bat out of Starling Marte's hands and Mark Vientos' hands when the Mets had opportunities to tack on runs. So here's how it all breaks out. 7th inning ends up going well because Iglesias gets the hit to drive in a couple runs. You go through the top of the 8th, as we just talked about. Bottom of the 8th, JD Martinez leads off, gets on. Starling Marte would have come up because they made the move for Bader and Vientos' spot. Well, now they had to work Acuna into the game. So Acuna comes in Starling Marte's spot, and Acuna strikes out on 3 pitches, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't love how all that worked out. And then also, funny enough, talking about the defense, why are you so quick to sub Vientos out for defense? I want his bat in the lineup the entire game. He's that important. And the play that Jose Iglesias got, which ended up being an infield single against Manaea in that 8th, that's a play I think Mark Vientos makes. Iglesias sort of juggled it a little bit, didn't get the throw out right away. And he doesn't have the arm that Mark Vientos does. So it was just kind of a weird situation where one move sort of haunted the Mets like 3 different ways. The play I think Vientos makes. Then the next inning, it's Acuna instead of Marte hitting. Eventually comes around. Lindor tacks on the insurance run with a double. That's great. It's 7-2, but you had a chance with runners at 2nd and 3rd to maybe break the game wide open again with Mark Vientos up. But instead, because of the substitution, it's Harrison Bader. Now, I don't want to talk too down. This is just analyzing what we saw in this game. It was still an amazing victory by the New York Mets. They handled Aaron Nola. They were hitting the ball hard all game. They got to the Phillies bullpen again. Sean Manaea pitched like an ace. Alonso, Winker, big home runs. Starling Marte, Jose Iglesias, Francisco Lindor, big hits. Great at bats by Nimmo and Alonso to draw the bases loaded a couple times with walks, not giving in when the Phillies are trying to avoid pitching to them. This was a fantastic game by the New York Mets. I don't want to get it twisted. I just think that there was a world where the Mets could have won this game without using Ryan Stanek, and potentially an even more lopsided fashion where we're looking at a 9-0 Mets victory and the Phillies really on their heels. Now they already are, and we'll talk about this in the final segment. The Phillies are absolutely on their heels, and this sets up really well for the Mets. And not just game 4, but it could even bleed into a potential game 5, the importance of winning the first one at home here. But again, it could have been a little more decisive, and maybe this is just me being greedy, but it does seem like a couple of those late inning decisions didn't quite work out for the Mets. Now, hopefully it doesn't matter. They win this series, and maybe you find some better answers in some of these spots moving forward. For example, if Jeff McNeil is on the bench instead of Acuna, well, now in that spot, you can have Jeff McNeil run for Vientos. Your defense is still going to be good with McNeil at 2nd, Iglesias at 3rd. And then in that spot, 2nd and 3rd, bottom of the 8th inning, it's Jeff McNeil who's hitting in that spot instead of Harrison Bader. So these things will get cleaned up, but the bullpen is still an issue. And as we look towards the next game, that is why it was so important for the Mets to get this victory, because now they have a big edge going into game 4. We'll talk about that in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This NFL season, FanDuel is there for you to get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you're in the middle of a game, you got a hunch, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can do the same thing when you're watching these Mets games. Maybe you have a good feeling if the Mets, let's say they fall behind 1-0 early and all of a sudden that money line number changes in a big way and you believe the Mets are going to come back, you throw a little sprinkle on it. And if you place that first $5 bet on FanDuel, you're going to get the $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So you're going to get started if you're new to FanDuel, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You don't have to win that first bet. You just sign up, place that first $5 bet, and immediately get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed in your account. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Seemed like an incredible atmosphere at Citi Field. Tickets might not come cheap this time of year, but they seem to be well worth it. If you want to watch Mets games surrounded by all the different fans and Grimace costumes and all the craziness that takes place at Citi Field, Game Time is the place to go, where it's a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And with Game Time picks, you'll be able to filter out the fluff and only see the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time scrolling through thousands of tickets. They'll show you the best possible deals that are available. When you download the Game Time app, you're also going to get $20 off your first purchase. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so now let's talk about what lies ahead for the New York Mets in Game 4. We talked about this on the show for the last couple episodes, the importance of winning the first game. And that just is true in any series, of course. When the series moves to a new location, getting that momentum, winning that first game, but particularly in this series. I think it was vital for the Mets to win Game 1 to carry over the momentum from Pete Alonso's huge home run in the wild card series to put the Phillies on their heels. They did that. They end up losing Game 2. I thought it was imperative to win this game because the Mets don't have as many good options as the Phillies when it comes to pitching. The Mets are a little more taxed, and they don't have a Zach Wheeler, right? They have Kodai Senga, but Kodai Senga is only going to give you 3 innings potentially in a Game 5. So having the Mets in the driver's seat for a Game 4 is so big because whoever is playing an elimination game in Game 4 has to manage things a little bit differently. So now we're looking at what's supposed to be the matchup, and that is Jose Quintana going up against Ranger Suarez. I wrote an article for Just Baseball today talking about how the bullpens are the Achilles heel for both of these teams, and also how these are teams that have been carried by starting pitching this year. Both the Mets and the Phillies were top 5 in baseball in innings pitched by their starters, bottom 5, of course, in innings pitched by their bullpens. We're going to see that play out for both of these teams in this series, particularly the final 2 games, where starting pitching is going to overlap. You're going to use multiple starters in these games to get around a lack of trust in your bullpen. So for the Mets, now you're going to see Jose Quintana go against Suarez. You have a little bit of a longer leash here because you're not facing elimination. If Jose Quintana gives up 2 runs in the first inning, you can still pitch him. He gets through that. He goes through the bottom part of the lineup. You can have him face that top of the lineup one more time and just see what happens. If Ranger Suarez gets knocked around in the first inning of Game 4, the Phillies are going to be in a very tough spot where they have to consider going to their Game 5 starter, and that is Zach Wheeler. There's also a chance they're going to start Wheeler on short rest. As I'm recording this, I obviously don't know what's going on in the post-game sessions if Rob Thompson has said anything about this. And I will be doing a show later on tonight once we know, we're going to see what happens with the other NLDS game. Not that that matters for this, but just to give it a little bit of time, I can read all the comments and then I'll give you, similar to the show I did today, a really in-depth preview of Game 4. We'll see what they decide to do. If I was the Phillies, I'd be going right to Wheeler because Ranger Suarez, who was an all-star in the first half and had pitched himself into the Cy Young conversation very early, he was awful down the stretch, had an ERA over 6. Now, Ranger Suarez in his career has a sub-2 postseason ERA. He has been nails the last 2 postseasons for the Phillies. But are we really sure, or are they really sure, that Ranger Suarez is just going to flush 10 really bad starts. He pitched through some injuries in the second half as well. This is a guy that is not going into this potential start with a good feeling. He might just be that dude in October. He might have ice in his veins. It might be Ranger Suarez that starts the game and is electric. We really don't know. But you got to think that one way or the other, Zach Wheeler in game 4 is in play. And while that makes game 4 a tougher task for the Mets, it also gives you an opportunity to go up against Christopher Sanchez in game 5. And that's the big reason why the Phillies would do this, because Christopher Sanchez can pitch on full rest in a potential game 5. So again, if I'm the Phillies, I would just go right to Wheeler and pitch him on short rest. Now, from the Mets perspective, you're facing Wheeler at home. You can try to carry this momentum, and he's on short rest. There's always a chance you can get on him. Certainly a lot more than you might be able to get on him if he's pitching at home in a game 5. So this really was big. If the Mets had lost this game, how does it manifest itself differently when it comes to how they manage their pitching? Well, again, Katana's got a shorter hook, so now maybe you need to go to David Peterson for bulk relief in game 4 instead of in game 5, where the Mets might want to just replicate what they did in game 1, which was Senga to Peterson to the bullpen. Now, they'll also have the ability to go to Luis Severino in that game 5, similar to how the Phillies have Christopher Sanchez. So I still think David Peterson will be in play to pitch in this potential game 4, but I think it would be more mirroring what we saw against the Brewers in that winner-take-all game 3, where David Peterson came on for the save. If I had to guess what the Mets' plan will be in this game, and again, you'll have a full game preview that I'll release that'll be a little more in-depth. I'll talk about how the Phillies have fared against Quintana this year. Once we know who's pitching, Suarez or Wheeler, I go through the matchups there. I'll talk about who will start that game if it is a lefty on the mound with Suarez. So we'll get into all of it. But what I'll say as far as how the game gets managed now, I think the goal would be, all right, you go to Quintana, you see how far he gets you. Maybe it's Reed Garrett for, potentially 2 innings after Quintana, because Garrett has now had a couple days. I think you're staying away from Maton the way he has pitched in this series. I don't know if you're going right back to the well on him. Stanek, we'll see if he's available. I'd imagine definitely not for multiple innings or 4 outs again. So maybe you pick and choose your spot where you use Stanek. So Stanek might be the guy. Let's say it's a 3-3 game, right? And it's the 4th inning and the top of the lineup is coming up. Obviously, you might have Quintana go through Harper because you have left on left. But if Nick Castellanos comes up with a couple guys on, maybe that's where you see Stanek get the big final out of one of those early innings. Then you can go to a Reed Garrett, and then maybe David Peterson sets up for Edwin Diaz, or maybe if you have to use Edwin Diaz in a late inning situation against the top of that Phillies lineup, maybe it's Peterson to close. But I think the Mets still have a lot of hands on deck for this game 4, but they don't have to be all hands on deck. And they can maybe save a couple guys just in case it goes to a game 5 where they'd have a full go of options. It probably just depends on circumstances. If the Mets are losing, you're not going to pitch David Peterson. I think Peterson only goes in game 4 if you have a chance to clinch this series early. But now the Mets are fully in the driver's seat. You win that game 3, you got the 2-1 lead at home with the chance to clinch it in front of your fans. Wednesday night is going to be absolutely electric. I cannot wait to watch that game. I am in Florida. I don't think that this hurricane is going to impact me. I feel horrible for the people in Central Florida that just went through stuff and now they're going through it again. I've living in South Florida my whole life. I know what that's like. We might see some weather, so I'm just acknowledging that to the live stream audience now. I will go live, assuming I have power and internet tomorrow night. So just to kind of get you on the page of what I'll be doing on the show. Again, I will have a show that goes up tomorrow morning, typical schedule, 6 a.m. on YouTube, where I'll be breaking down and previewing game 4 of this series. And then I'll go live if the Mets clinch, if they lose, whatever it is, assuming I have the ability to do so. And we will keep things rolling from there. I appreciate all of you who tuned into this live stream. The Mets are 1 win away from the NLCS. Who would have thunk it a couple weeks ago? This team has just been on a magical run, and I cannot wait to see what the next chapter of this journey is. Make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that notification bell so that you are notified whenever I go live. Make sure if you're listening to the replay on the audio side, you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.